It was late and I'd been driving for hours on an empty highway. The road felt like it went on forever, with no end in sight. My stomach rumbled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since noon. The green light on the dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. I sighed, hoping there was a restaurant or fast food joint open, but the road didn't seem to let me in. Then, out of nowhere, I saw an old neon sign blinking out in front of me that said, "Elliot's Restaurant open 24 hours. Relief washed over me as I turned on the signal and pulled into the parking lot. The restaurant looked like it had been pulled out of the 1960s. Its pale red and white exterior was barely visible under the dim light of a few bulbs flickering above the door. There were no other cars parked, which didn't surprise me at this late hour. I pulled over and got out, stretching my stiff legs before stepping inside. The bell above the door rang as I stepped in, echoing through the eerily quiet restaurant. The interior was as old as the outside, with vinyl seats and a checkerboard floor. Although everything looked, it was run down and dusty, as if it hadn't been properly cleaned in years, but the smell of grilled food still lingered in the air, and my hunger overcame any worries. "Hello," I called out and stepped inside, but there was no response. There was no one behind the counter, no busy waiters, nothing. I was alone. I should have left immediately, but hunger and fatigue clouded my judgment. I grabbed a seat by the window and sat down. The plastic-coated menu was already on the table. Burgers, fries, milkshakes, standard restaurant fare. As I looked at the menu, I heard soft footsteps from the kitchen, followed by the distinct thud of plates. I looked up, expecting to see a waiter coming out of the swinging door behind the counter, but no one came out. I sat there, staring at the door, feeling increasingly uneasy. "Can I have your service?" I called out. This time, my voice was louder. The footsteps stopped abruptly. There was silence again. My heart beat faster, and for a moment I considered leaving. Then I heard the familiar sound of grilling meat. The aroma of meat wafted through the stove. My stomach growled again, this time louder, so I decided to wait a little longer. Finally, the kitchen door opened, but instead of a waiter or chef, there was a man in an old-fashioned waiter's uniform. His clothes were spotless. It was as if he had just stepped out of a 1950s time capsule. His hair was combed back, and his eyes were wrong. Empty. Empty. As if he was looking through me rather than at me. "Sorry for the long wait," he said, though his tone was indifferent, devoid of any real emotion. "How was it?" Just a cheeseburger and fries," I said, forcing a smile, though my gut was twisting into knots. There was something unsettling about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The man nodded, wrote down the order on a pad, and disappeared back into the kitchen without another word. As soon as the door swung shut behind him, the diner fell back into that eerie silence. I glanced around, realizing just how unnaturally quiet it was. No hum of kitchen appliances, no faint chatter or clatter of plates. It was like the entire building was holding its breath. Minutes ticked by, and the unease gnawing at me intensified. I pulled out my phone, hoping to distract myself, but there was no service. Of course, I was in the middle of nowhere. With a frustrated sigh, I shoved the phone back into my pocket. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like the wind, but it sent chills down my spine. I looked around, but the diner was still empty. I leaned back in my booth, trying to calm myself down, when the whisper came again, clearer this time. "Get out!" I bolted upright, my heart racing. The voice had been right behind me. I twisted in my seat, expecting to see someone standing there, but the booth was empty. No one was there. My breathing became shallow as panic started to set in. I glanced back toward the kitchen, wondering if I should just leave before the food arrived. But then, the man reappeared, balancing a tray with my burger and fries. He placed it on the table with the same emotionless expression. "Anything else?" he asked, though his eyes didn't meet mine. "No," I managed to choke out. "This is fine." He turned and walked away, disappearing back into the kitchen without another word. I stared down at the plate in front of me. The food looked normal enough, crispy fries, a perfectly cooked burger, but I'd lost my appetite entirely. Something was wrong with this place. Very wrong. I pushed the plate away and stood up, ready to leave. I grabbed my wallet, threw some cash on the table, and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, I glanced back at the empty diner one last time, and that's when I saw them. In the booth where I had been sitting, there were people. They weren't there before, but now there they sat. 2 men, a woman, and a little girl, all dressed in outdated clothes, like something out of an old black and white photograph. Their faces were pale, almost translucent, their eyes staring straight ahead, unblinking. I froze, my hand hovering over the door handle. My mouth went dry as I realized they were all staring at my untouched food. The little girl reached out, picking up a fry, her hand passing through the burger like mist. My breath caught in my throat and I yanked the door open, stumbling outside into the cool night air. I raced to my car, my heart pounding in my ears. Fumbling with my keys, I jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figures following me, but the diner was just as empty as when I'd arrived. No sign of the ghosts, no sign of the strange server, just the eerie glow of the neon sign flickering in the distance as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until I was back on the main highway, far away from that place. My pulse finally began to slow as I merged back onto the familiar road, the lights of civilization growing closer. I let out a long breath, trying to shake off the lingering fear. But the next morning, when I woke up in my motel room, my phone buzzed with a notification, a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. The message read, "You left your meal unfinished. We're still waiting." Attached was a picture of my booth at the diner. The ghosts were there, sitting in my place, staring at my untouched food, with the server standing behind them, smiling.